But Ted, if you can, the troops are all assembled. We're waiting for your orders. So if you can, go ahead and address the folks. We have about 17 folks on the line now. So go ahead.
Outstanding. I hope everyone can hear me okay.
Can you hear Ted? Can everyone hear Ted? Thumbs up there, Ted. Okay.
Great. We've had to go through some draconian measures here to try to connect due to I guess security firewalls and all of that. We'll try to work that for the next meeting. But I want to thank everybody for taking your time today to spend with us this afternoon, giving us an hour of your very valuable time. We know how valuable it is, and I thank you for that. And let me also say that it's a privilege to be asked to be a part of this group. I think there is great potential here to do good things, not only for the GSA, but also for our nation. And I hope that you all are as enthusiastic as I am about that fact. I'm excited to be here. I think that the work that we're going to do together will be our work, right? So I want everybody to feel that you have a clear voice, that your opinion will be heard and listened to, and discussed, and then we will decide, I think, the path forward for GSA as we are as a working group. That will lead me to discussion here as we go through the agenda. I think everybody's already done introductions, so we kind of know who is on the call with us today. So we've had a chance to meet. I look forward to meeting each and every one of you in person at some point down the stream. I think that it's valuable to be able to come together periodically too in person. I think there's real value in that, and hopefully we can do that in the near future. So without any further ado, I think we ought to go ahead and get going on our agenda. I heard Dr. Neal talking about the legislative initiatives that has been presented to some of the members on the Hill. I wanted to give him a few minutes to talk about the specific initiatives in the legislation and what he's trying to do. So I would like to give him an opportunity to do that. And then I would like to talk about how we as a group want to conduct business. What is our governance structure going to look like? How are we going to do business? And what we want to tackle in the next year. Because I think that's kind of where we have to start, is thinking about what do we want to do? What do we want as a group to get accomplished next year? And in what priority? What do we want to go after first? And then from that, we can build a workflow or a strategy or execution plan then to go get after that stuff in the next year. So let me pause there for a moment to see if there's any thoughts or comments from anybody before I ask Dr. Neal then to elaborate on the legislation. Any thoughts from anybody?
So any comments to George to Ted Mercer's opening comments? Any before George gets going? No. Okay. Hearing none. No comments, Ted. To turn the floor to George.
Okay. And Steve, if you can allow me to share my screen, please.
What your thoughts are on these initiatives?
There you go, George.
Okay.
I put the link to the space, your stuff in the chat, so that it's in there.
All right. Okay. And can you see my screen now? Okay, very good. So just some comments first. There were some initial questions and comments about, wait a minute, GSA is an international group. How can we talk about legislation and things? And so here's my thinking. over the last few years, in working with Global Spaceport Alliance, we've seen a lot of great work that we can do on a spaceport by spaceport basis, or working together as an alliance. But there's also a lot of issues ranging from resources to laws to policies to legislation and so forth that have a big impact on what we do at our spaceports. So recognizing that each country is different, each state and region may have different ways to address things like that, GSA would like to at least share thinking, recommendations, observations, challenges among our group, and then to the extent that we as an organization can assist you in either working through similar things in your area, or working together to advocate for some of the things we need, then hopefully that will be a positive step. So with that as an introduction, I think it's important to understand a little bit of the context before we get into the line by line of the legislative proposal itself. So again, from the US, the number of launches per year is going up exponentially, over 100 last year. We're going to break that record this year. In terms of human space flights from the US, there's been a handful over the last 3 years for the government, 7 flights with 26 people going to the International Space Station. But if you look at non-government activities, there have been 3 times as many flights, 21, 4 times as many people, 108, going to space. And that includes the Inspiration 4 mission, 3 flights for Axiom, 9 flights for Virgin Galactic, and 8 flights for Blue Origin. Meanwhile, the economy is large and growing, $546 billion according to Space Foundation. 3/4 of that or more is non-government spending, and a strong consensus among economists and finance experts that we're going to get to over $1 trillion a year in just the next 10 years. And we in GSA believe that a lot of that growth could take place at or near spaceports, because we think spaceports are not just places from which launches and reentries are conducted. They can also be these focal points and technology hubs for manufacturing, research, education and training, workforce development, point-to-point, and lots of other activities. So all of that is really good, but there are some issues that need some attention right now. Love to see some kind of a commercial spaceflight focused research activity. The need for a national and actually international spaceport policy. The need for infrastructure funding, the ability to provide human spaceflight training, and the need for regulatory planning to support point-to-point transportation that is right around the corner. So just quickly ticking through each of those in terms of research. Again, one example, the FAA Office of Commercial Space Transportation had a Center of Excellence that was started back in 2010. Not very much money, about $1 million a year. 10 universities, including some from other countries, and several dozen industry members. That timed out in 2022, and there was nothing to replace it. And so not an easy way for academia and industry to get engaged with commercial space-related research. So we would love to see something to fill that void. We've got a new advisory group starting up, Commercial Spaceflight Research Alliance Working Group, that's trying to figure out about that. In the meantime, GSA is proposing, hey, the Secretary of Transportation ought to award some grants to allow this type of work to take place, and that would be international in the ideal case. In terms of a national spaceport policy, again, today in this country, most of our launches are taking place from Cape Canaveral or from Vandenberg, but there's a history and a future possibility of hurricanes, tornadoes, earthquakes, wildfires, launch pad accidents, even terrorist attacks, and that could put a real damper on our access to space, with the recovery time in the months or even years to come. So GSA would like to see some kind of a policy that says we'd like to see a national and actually global spaceport network with commercial, government, and privately owned launch and reentry sites so that we can continue to have access to space and all the things that come with that. Spaceport infrastructure funding. Again, in the US, federal government has traditionally provided substantial funding for all kinds of different infrastructure, roads and bridges, interstate highways, railroads, seaports, airports, but there is no comparable program today for space-related infrastructure, such as for spaceports. So we'd like to see if we can address that. There are spaceports popping up. We know we've got state-supported spaceports, like at Wallops, like at Kodiak in Alaska. We've got Boca Chica for SpaceX, and Spaceport America, where Virgin Galactic is operating, and West Texas for Blue Origin. But those are not receiving any federal dollars. So we really should be taking a look at how we can make that happen. GSA did a survey a few years back for US spaceports on, do you have any infrastructure projects that you have in mind? 10 different spaceports responded. They came up with 44 different projects, total cost of about $382 million. So there is a waiting list, even in just the US. So we'd like to see an existing congressionally approved program, the Space Transportation Infrastructure Matching Grants Program, which has not been used for the last 10 years or so, to be revised and updated to be more consistent with how grants are given for airports and other modes of transportation, and put some real dollars on the table, like on the order of $100 million per year, and then prioritize those awards based on the benefit to safety, capacity, efficiency, and resiliency. Human spaceflight training. Again, NASA continues to have its astronauts fly in T-38s because it's great preparation for flying in space, even if you're not flying on a winged spacecraft. There's lots of people and companies that have similar aircraft, but they're allowed to fly around, do aerobatics, go somewhere for brunch. They're not allowed to sell anybody a ticket to fly in the back seat to be more accustomed to the kinds of experiences they will eventually see on a human spaceflight. So we'd like to see Congress change the definition of space support vehicles, which they recently put into law, to allow high-performance aircraft to be considered space support vehicles and allow those activities to be overseen by the Office of Commercial Space Transportation. And you could do that under informed consent, just like we do for the people that fly on rockets. And that would instantly enable any spaceport with a runway to be able to host these kinds of activities. So Jared Isaacman did that with his crew for Inspiration 4, and he's about to do the same thing in support of their Polaris Dawn mission coming up in the next few days. But he's a billionaire, and he can afford to have people fly for free on the aircraft that he has access to. Regular people, regular companies are not allowed to do that currently under US law. And then point-to-point, I think this is going to be a huge game changer, being able to fly from any 2 points on the Earth in just a couple of hours. Huge potential benefits there. You all are familiar with the Starship that is eventually going to take people to Mars and support NASA's Artemis program to the moon, but that same vehicle can do point-to-point to most places on Earth in half an hour, anywhere in an hour. A lot of potential there. And it's not just SpaceX. There are a number of companies with smaller but very capable systems under development right now, including several from international entities. So Destinus from Switzerland, Dawn from the Netherlands, Polaris from Germany, Space Agent Systems from Canada. Now's the time to be thinking about how do we regulate, how do we get ready for that kind of an activity. So that brings us to the regulatory oversight and the recognition that currently today in the US, the Office of Commercial Space Transportation, which is one of the lines of business in the FAA, is not always getting the kind of time and attention that it needs from senior leadership, the ability to directly communicate with stakeholders, the resources it needs to do its job, and the advocacy and support in resolving key issues. So we think that could be addressed by taking the office out from under the FAA and having it report directly to the Secretary of Transportation, which is where the office was initially when it was established back in 1984. And there would be a lot of benefits to doing that, in our opinion, including resolving key issues in a timely fashion, streamlining communications, having light touch regulatory framework, but still ensuring public safety, expediting needed changes, and then allowing consideration of the case for additional resources. So all that is a long introduction to the Commercial Spaceflight Operations Act that we talked about at the Capitol Hill Day in June. There's 6 major provisions, and they fit on one page, which we can certainly make available to you, and then 9 pages of text that go into the nitty-gritty of how to implement these things. And the basic provisions are: recognize commercial spaceflight as an independent operating administration by having a separate administration within the Department of Transportation, supporting Commercial Spaceflight Research Alliance, adopting a national spaceport policy, allowing improved commercial human spaceflight training using high-performance aircraft, providing funding for spaceport infrastructure, and then having a report to Congress on what kinds of changes do we need to policies, laws, and procedures to help us get ready for point-to-point transportation through space. So that's the quick review of what we've got going so far, and every country is going to have a different situation. The advisory group doesn't have to do just this. It can have other ideas and other ways to affect policy in the appropriate areas, but this is something that's on the table, and we can at least use that as a reference and a starting point. So, Steve and Ted, back to you.
Share any thoughts or comments over what Dr.
Oh, sorry, Ted, I'm sorry, I had you on mute. If you wouldn't mind, just start over again. Sorry about that.
Sure.
Mhm.
Thank you for that, Dr. Neal. Before we go on to a more fundamental agenda here for this first meeting, any thoughts or comments from anybody on what Dr. Neal just shared with us? Any thoughts out there?
I didn't. Hi, Paulo from Brazil. I didn't have seen the in detail. Sorry about that, but there is any specific discussion, because you are changing the subordination from FAA space, which is something interesting because of the airspace management coordination that you're doing today within DC actually center to reach out space. Understanding that the orbit was designed in US for the Department of Commerce. There is no provision at this point in the legislation US, and just want to highlight that in New Zealand and Australia did that. I was unable to do that in Brazil when I'm revising it for space and high altitude, because we understand that ICAO goes up to something like 60,000 feet, and above that, in theory, you don't have any agency regulation doing regulations on the airspace. So it should be something aligned what Australia and New Zealand are doing, because I believe that high altitude is a good word. So connecting the space you have between the current airspace management for ICAO and FAA, one side of it at least, to space itself.
And so just a quick response to that. Again, every country may choose to do it in a different way. And if you were starting from a clean sheet in the US, you probably would do it a different way. But today there are lots of different agencies that have pieces of the regulatory authority. And what we're seeing is that because the FAA is focusing most of its people, most of its money, and most of its attention on traditional aviation, the kinds of issues that we're talking about here today aren't necessarily being talked about, addressed, or resolved. And so that's the reason for potentially separating the two. We still want to obviously ensure safety with respect to other users of the airspace, but right now it doesn't look like we're getting the kind of support and attention to space-related things, both the suborbital and the orbital activities.
Understood.
I think we also have to keep in mind, to my colleague's point about ICAO. ICAO is a great organization that basically sets international standards for aircraft. The issue that we have, because we are such a new, if you will, entity coming to the stage, particularly when you're talking about spaceports, is that there is no ICAO-like body, or there is no ICAO-like division that is relevant for spaceports. Not yet, anyway. And so we're going to have to, as a community, kind of govern ourselves in that regard and take the lead on setting standards, whether that is above 60,000 feet or whether it is spaceport standards on the terrestrial area for spaceports. I think that's one of the things that we'll have to look at. And there is movement in that direction. In October of this year, there are going to be 6 of us that are going to sign a memorandum of understanding between commercial spaceports of 6 different countries. And all it is we're going to be agreeing in this MOU to work together. We're going to commit to work together as we try to develop international standards for spaceports, just the way that aircraft have international standards. So just to add to that discussion. So hopefully there'll be more that we'll talk about on that as we go forward. Any other comments or thoughts on Dr. Neal's presentation?
No hands raised.
Yeah.
No hands raised, Ted.
Copies of the legislation out to everybody in the group so they can have a chance to read it and digest it as you and I have. There is one thought that I will put on the table, Dr. Neal, and I think you and I talked about this before. When we took this legislation to the Hill, one of the things that struck me was that it's an awful lot in single legislation for the members to bite on. I think one of the things that we ought to consider is how we might streamline that and focus it on the particular bodies or members that would be interested in pursuing the particular topic in the legislation. So that's a conversation for another day, but I think it's an awful lot in that legislation for a member, I think, to take on. But again, we can talk about that some more. I think that one of the things that this group has to do, though, is to get the draft legislation that's been prepared, read it and digest it, and then come back to this group where we can determine whether this group wants to support what's in that legislation or not. I think that's a fundamental decision that I think the group has to make on whether we're going to work over the next year building execution or workflow plans on the aspects that are, or the topics that are covered in that legislation. So that's the first thing that I would put on the table is see if we can get that out to everybody read it and digest it, and then we come back at a subsequent meeting and discuss whether we want to take these on or not, or whether we want to support these or not. But I don't think it's fair to do that today because I don't think everybody's had an opportunity to really read it and digest it. I think then the next thing that I think we need to do for this inaugural meeting here is that we need to talk about our governance structure and what that's going to look like. Are we going to operate from the perspective of assigning specific tasks to specific individuals of the group to go and work and then come back to the group and report out on? Or are we going to work where we identify the work that we want to do and then assign it to a subgroup with a lead from our group to go off and work the issue and then come back with the results to the group? So let me throw that out there for comment. No thoughts on that?
I like the idea, General, of let's talk about what we'd, this is Craig in Oklahoma, what we would like to achieve, and then take that and break that up into smaller bites for those to tackle. That's my thoughts on it.
Great. Okay, well, if there are no other thoughts, we could discuss that further. But again, for this first meeting, I want to put some things out, get food for thought. So when we come back together, we can talk about these issues and then make some decisions about the our way ahead as a group, because it's up to us to decide how we want to proceed. I think the next issue that we need to consider is, and I want to put this out there, because if we don't do something like what I'm going to suggest, we could spend all of our time spinning our wheels for a year and never get anything done. So what I would propose is that we put some brain cells together to think about, as a group, individually and as a group, what is it do we want to accomplish this next year? Specifically, what would we as a group like to accomplish in the next year? And then we take that list, we prioritize it, and then we collectively pursue the top items on that list. And I think at least that way, it will have us focused on working on the things that we believe are important for the industry. Thoughts on that?
And if I could add, General, if I can add to that, as you review and really dig into the provisions of Dr. Neal's legislation, as he articulated, also consider, what might be missing, right? And then to the General's point, prioritizing those elements in your own mind as to which you feel would be the most important of those for us to pursue. I hope that clarifies things a little, or adds a little bit to that, what the General just said.
And this is George. One other thought, especially when it comes to policy and legislation, those things can go on for months or years at a time. So it may be that we want to have several different kinds of tasks that are on different time scales that we work in parallel. So one thing might be working on a particular legislative provision and trying to get support for that. Another one might be, how do the spaceports interact with one another, as you were mentioning, in terms of collaborating on the development of spaceport standards. Or there might be other things that have to do with how do spaceports engage with their local legislative representatives, either at local, state, national levels. So there might be a couple of different lanes, if you will, in terms of the activities that people think are worthwhile. Some of them it may be able to be done in the next month or two. Some of them may take a year. Some of them may take several years, and that's okay.
No, I think he was just done.
No argument there, but that will be driven by the list of the things that we want to accomplish in a year. And it'll be driven by that, right? You may not complete them in a year. Some of the legislative stuff may take longer. Some of the policy stuff may take longer. But you'll be able to make sound decisions about whether you want to pursue them or not. For example, policy issues, you may, since we got an election coming up in a couple of months, you may want to hold on striking at the Hill on policy issues until we see which way the elections go and which policies do you want to try to strike first because of the policies of that particular administration in terms of where they want to go. I think also, though, that our focus should not be just on what Dr. Neal has laid out. You know, we all have a set of experiences, background, and knowledge in this industry, in this field, in this area, and we all have ideas and thoughts about what we think we ought to be pursuing to make a difference, and to support the nation. You know, one, Dr. Neal talked about spaceports. Another might be spaceports are not today considered one of the 16 critical infrastructure sectors. Maybe that's something that we want to go after as a group. I also think that the Hill engagement is not the only engagement we need to make. You know, we have a National Space Council. Some of us may be members of the National Space Council. We ought to be driving the agenda that we develop to garner interest at the Space Council level, to drive change, to drive action. Because they can do it if we can generate enough interest in that body to take it on. So, just some initial thoughts. Any other comments, thoughts?
Well, maybe being part of the international community on this one, I really would like to highlight that when I was at the space station in Brazil and was discussing with FAA for align the streamline Part 450 process for using Brazil, I really, and we had that discussion with UNOSA at the time. And I don't see UNOSA as a leading operational agency for this kind of stuff. That's why I don't see also ICAO doing that. But so there is something that we need to establish. Probably the GSA could collaborate that because it has some other international bodies. Maybe we can expand for some kind of non-official standards for spaceport is something that's interesting. Also for some basic baselines for launch, because if you're gonna do some point-to-point logistics with Starship, it will require some type of standards to fly over countries if we want to do that happen. It's the best interest for everybody, in my understanding. So I really don't have an answer for that. I have my own thoughts, but I don't have an answer specifically because this will require some kind of operational agency like ICAO. And I don't see UNOSA as doing that, really. And I don't know exactly what type of agency should do that. But at least a baseline for a framework to, well, at least to operationalize the operations of like a Starship flying point-to-point among countries that are feasible to do that. It's a first step, as a first step. And we can do the reusable aircraft that was shown by Dr. Neal. So there's some other options. So there's the hypersonic flights that could also do the job. And what category this kind of, so you see in the Dawn airspace or from other equivalent, which category they go? So they go on the aircraft category or they go on the spacecraft category? That's a challenging question because who's going to regulate their flight and who's going to authorize their flight path? I'm a former pilot and a former air weapons controller for the Air Force, so I understand that there's some challenges on this one. Thank you.
Those are excellent comments, and again, just to reiterate what General Mercer was talking about, this may be an area where spaceports themselves can start working on the standards, and once you come up with something that's good, governments may adopt those, or the international community, the UN, may adopt those. But we've done the work that would enable them to do that.
That's right. Thank you.
Yeah, if I may, let me follow up on what Paulo just said. So I might be the less knowledgeable of the bunch in terms of aerospace, but in terms of commerce and international trade, I do have an extensive experience. And I can tell you that actually, at least lately, spaceport or your kind of organization is technically the only point of contact to any commercial space activity around an area. And that makes a lot of difference. I know that this might not, my comment cannot make a lot of difference in terms of policy making. It might just confirm the necessity of creating a kind of guideline, a unique guideline for all the spaceport, but it's really, really important because companies, international companies and international project needs clear point of contact, clear policy. And Paulo is right when he say that NASA right now is not exactly organized to be open or to be openly committed to that, but you are. And you are the only person that I was able to contact when in Florida for the Florida spaceport, not to mention here in Houston. Here in Houston, we're two different hats. So as an American citizen, I can clearly see the value of having a spaceport in the town. As an Italian citizen, I can understand how it's having this institution, these realities, this ecosystem that is growing exponentially around the spaceport is getting more and more and more international traction. So it makes a lot of sense to be organized. That could give us or a spaceport alliance a lot of I can say point of advantage on other institutions on the ground because it's more practical, more accessible.
Excellent.
Agree with what you just said. It's again further articulated by the fact that, like I said, we've got 6 countries are going to join in Milan, Italy, here in October to sign a memorandum of understanding to work together for spaceport standards. It just shows you the level of interest internationally on spaceports. But that's 6 separate countries. Some countries you would be surprised that they are talking about putting in a spaceport. Peru is one of those countries. So I absolutely agree with what you just said.
So just to follow up on that, we don't want to share information prematurely, but once those agreements are announced in Milan in October, then I think certainly GSA would be happy to support additional potential signatories in the months ahead, potentially at our Spaceport Summit in January. So this is not something that people have missed. This is the beginning of what hopefully will be a continuously growing and expanding group.
Right. That's the whole idea. And at some point, if you get large enough, in terms of the nations involved, we may be able then to convince the international organizations like the United Nations to develop an ICAO-like structure for spaceport on the international side. So, hopefully that is where this will go. Well, listen, before we run out of time, one other thing I would like to ask the members to do is for our next meeting, please come, each of you come with your ideas, your personal ideas of what you think we should pursue in this next year. Please review Dr. Neal's legislation and feel free to pick that apart. If there's one element in there you think we should pursue, and not the others, please so state that, and bring it to our next meeting, so that when we come to the next meeting, we will have a list of initiatives that we as a group would like to pursue in the next year. Then the next step will be a quick survey will go out to each and every one of you, then to prioritize that list, for us to prioritize it as a group, and then decide how many of those initiatives we want to try to accomplish or go after in the next year. So that is what I would suggest. I put that on the table for other thoughts.
Sounds good.
And I would suggest Stephen and I were talking earlier about an operations tempo for our meetings. We thought initially once a month. I think would get us a nice cadence and not overburden anyone, because we all have day jobs too. But once a month would do it. But I think for our next meeting after this one, maybe we want to do that one in 2 weeks. That gives everybody time to digest Dr. Neal's work and develop the list of what you think we ought to go after, so that we can then take the next month to begin to work plans and assign to subgroups. So thoughts on that?
You're suggesting that we reconvene in 2 weeks from now, say on the 18th?
We'll have to deconflict everybody's schedule, right? Maybe 2 to 2.5 weeks.
Okay. Well,
Open for other thoughts on that.
I concur. We can email our items to pursue this next year if you cannot be on that call. But I think that's a great plan to quickly get that coalition of ideas together quickly, and then we can go on the cadence of once a month. Once we have once we've pared that down to what we want to focus on.
if that's the case, then it would be the latter part of the week of the 16th, maybe the 18th or 19th, Wednesday or Thursday there. And we could put that out and as you say, deconflict schedules. Mm-hmm.
Out to everybody and say, hey, can you make one of these dates, and see if we get enough of a quorum to have to pull the meeting together.
Okay.
I would like, even if you can't make the meeting though, I would like everybody's input on what you think we ought to be trying to go after, and don't be afraid to speak from your perspective in terms of your experience, background, or the position that you currently hold, and then give us your votes on Dr. Neal's work, the legislation. Should we go after one? Should we go after all? Or should we go after some of what's in his proposed legislation? And then, 2.5 weeks to give us plenty of time to do that. And then we'll come back together and then talk about, okay, which ones do we want to try to do, what the priority would look like, and so forth. That would be that meeting, and that would take us an hour for sure. Any other thoughts, comments?
Sounds good.
I see thumbs up, Ted.
Yeah,
Good.
sounds like a
Thank
good
you.
plan.
Well, after we get together here in 2.5 weeks, go through this work, and then we'll go to a monthly cadence where we'll then begin to work on what we laid out for ourselves.
And so, Ted, I'll be sharing the video and a summary of this meeting with the other members that weren't able to join us. So with the same instructions. So hopefully we'll expand, even beyond this group for their input. Mm-hmm.
For the mayor.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And then then we'll just, scrub our, and we'll prioritize collectively. Because I think that's important. I think, Steve, your survey idea is a great one. Because when we collected the list, everybody's had their input. Then we go out with a survey and people can prioritize. And then we can take that data and come up with the top 5, 10, whatever.
Cool.
Okay. Well, I strive to try to be on time. I also try to strive to be able to get in a little easier next time. Again, I apologize for that, but technology did not cooperate with us today.
We'll get that straight.
We need last minutes from anybody before we give you back your day.
Very good. Thank you.
Again, I look forward to meeting you all and working with you. Also, when we come back next time, we can look at when we want to try to put an in-person meeting together at some point in the future. I think it's important for us to do that. I don't know how many are planning to attend the meeting in Milan, but for those that can attend that, maybe we could come together there in a meeting in Milan while we're there. Just a thought. But we'll talk about that at the next meeting.
Okay.
Steve, do we have anything else?
That's it, sir. So we can conclude the meeting. Thank you all for joining. And so we have our marching orders. And I'll be following up very shortly with a summary and some minutes and action items for us. So as we've discussed. So with that, I guess we'll conclude.
Okay.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you all very much for your time.
Thank you.
everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Ciao, Julia.
Signed off. We're signing it. We good, Ted? Yeah, everyone's signing off. Mm-hmm.
Great. Steve, thanks for all the work pulling together. Thank you. We'll come in 2.5 weeks and then go to work.
All right, and I'll get with Kim, get your schedule cleared first.